The wind came up from the south at midday, black and mean, and by the time Padric Voss reached the harbor, the squall had turned the bay into a churning gray hell that sent spray clear over the breakwater stones. Every boat that could make it back had already tied up at the moorings, and the fishermen stood in clumps along the cliff path, counting hulls and watching the horizon. Padric counted too, his eyes tracking the whitecaps, and that was when he saw it. A small fishing boat, single-masted, riding too high in the water, empty of crew, drifting sideways toward the Devil's Teeth where the black rocks jutted up like broken knives. "That is Calla Zarn's boat," old Willem said beside him, squinting. "The orc girl from the North Cove. Is she on it?" Padric asked. "No one can tell, but it came from that direction and she went out before dawn." The other men were already turning away, muttering about the storm and lost causes. Orcs fished the North Cove by old agreement, kept to themselves, sold their catch at the market without much talk. It was an arrangement that worked because nobody pushed it. Padric looked at the dory he kept above the tide line, looked at the rocks, looked at the boat that was 3 minutes from being kindling. Then he started down the path. "Voss, you cannot be serious," Willem called after him. Padric did not answer. He reached his dory, flipped it upright, and started dragging it toward the water. The wind tried to rip it from his hands. He got it to the edge where the waves came boiling up over the shingle and paused just long enough to check the oars. "You will die out there for an empty boat," someone shouted from the cliff. Maybe. Probably. But he had seen men drown before, had pulled up nets with bodies in them, and the thought of not trying sat worse in his gut than the fear. He shoved the dory into the surf, threw himself over the side, and got the oars into the locks before the next wave could spin him broadside. The bay wanted to kill him immediately. A wave picked up the dory and slammed it down so hard his teeth clacked together. He rowed, leaning into it, feeling the burn in his shoulders, keeping his bow pointed into the waves. The orc boat was northeast, or had been. In this mess it was hard to say where anything was. Water came over the sides. He rowed harder. The squall hit full force, rain like gravel against his face, and for a minute he could not see anything at all. Then the wind shifted, and there it was, the boat, closer than he had thought, already scraping against the outermost rock with a sound like a scream. And there, clinging to the mast, soaked and small against the storm, was a girl, not in the water yet, still aboard. That was something. He angled toward her, fighting the current that wanted to smash him into the same rocks. The trick was to come in parallel, ride the surge, and get close enough to throw a line without getting pinned. He had done it before with traps, never with a boat, never in a squall. He got as near as he dared and stood, bracing his legs, holding a coiled rope. "Jump!" he shouted. The girl looked at him. She had green skin, dark hair plastered to her skull, and even from 20 feet away he could see the fear in her face. She shook her head. "The boat is going to break apart," Padric yelled. "Jump now!" She looked down at the water, at the rocks, at him. Then her boat gave a lurch and the mast snapped with a crack like a gunshot, and she was falling. Padric threw the rope, saw her grab for it, saw her go under. He hauled, pulling hand over hand, and then she surfaced, gasping, still holding on. He dragged her to the dory, got his hands under her arms, and heaved her over the side. She landed in the bottom, coughing up seawater. Her boat gave one final groan and split in half against the Devil's Teeth. Padric sat down and started rowing. The trip back took forever. His arms turned to stone, his lungs burned, and every wave seemed determined to finish what the rocks had started. The girl lay curled in the bottom of the dory, shaking. He kept rowing. Eventually the beach appeared through the rain, and then hands were reaching down to pull the dory up onto the shingle. "You got her," Willem said, astonished. "Boat is gone," Padric said. His voice sounded strange, far away. He looked down. The girl was trying to sit up, water streaming from her clothes. She had small tusks, he saw now, and her eyes were amber, and she was staring at him like she could not quite believe he was real. "You came out," she said, "in the squall for me." "For your boat," he said, which was not quite true but easier than the truth. "Could not reach it in time." "Why?" she asked. He did not have an answer that made sense, so he shrugged. "Could not watch it happen. Someone brought a blanket and draped it over her shoulders." She stood, unsteady, still staring at him. She was younger than he had thought, maybe 20, and small for an orc, barely up to his shoulder. "Thank you," she said. Then the harbor master was there, asking questions, and the crowd closed in, and Padric slipped away to tie up his dory and check it for damage. By the time he looked up again, the girl was gone. He figured that was the end of it. 3 days later, she appeared at his cottage with a basket. Padric lived a quarter-mile from the village in a stone house his father had built, close enough to see the bay, far enough that neighbors did not drop by without reason. He was mending a net in the yard when he heard footsteps and looked up to see her walking up the path, the basket over one arm. "I brought fish," she said. "Smoked. I did it myself." He stood, setting the net aside. "You did not have to do that." "I did, though. You saved my life." She held out the basket. "My name is Calla, Padric," he said, taking it. The fish smelled good, salt and alder smoke. "Thank you." She nodded, then looked past him at the cottage, at the net, at the bay beyond. "Your boat is down at the harbor." "Yes, I go out most days." "I saw it. A good boat." She paused. "Mine is gone. I mean, you saw that." "I am sorry," he said, and meant it. A fisherman without a boat was like a bird without wings. "It was my father's," Calla said quietly. "He died last winter. The boat was all I had left of him, and now it is at the bottom of the bay." Padric did not know what to say to that. He had lost his own father young, knew the weight of it. "Will you build another?" he asked. She laughed, sharp and bitter. "With what? I have no money. The clan used to share resources, but there are only 4 families left in the North Cove now. Everyone else moved inland. The fishing has been bad for years." "Bad here too," Padric said. "The big company from Port Marin has been running trawlers through the bay, scraping the bottom. It ruins the breeding grounds." Calla's expression changed, hardened. "I know the ones. They have been pushing into our waters too. They told my uncle that the North Cove is not protected under the old agreements, that orcs have no legal claim to traditional fishing grounds. He has been trying to fight it, but he is no scholar. He does not know human law." "Does anyone?" Padric muttered. That surprised a real laugh out of her, small and quick. "No, probably not." They stood there for a moment, the wind moving between them, and Padric felt something shift, some recognition he could not name. She was looking at him differently now, curious. "I should go," Calla said. "I just wanted to bring the fish, to say thank you properly." "It is too much," Padric said. You rode out into a squall," she interrupted. "Everyone else watched. You did not. That is not nothing." He did not know what to say to that either, so he just nodded. She turned to go, then hesitated. "If you are ever near the North Cove, you could stop by. My uncle smokes eel better than anyone on this coast. I could trade you some." "I might do that," Padric said. She smiled just a little and walked back down the path. Padric went inside, set the basket on the table, and stared at it for a long time. He did not go to the North Cove right away. The weather turned bad again. 3 days of wind and rain that kept everyone off the water, and by the time it cleared he had convinced himself that her offer had just been politeness, nothing more. But the fish had been good, and he found himself thinking about what she had said, about the trawlers and the ruined breeding grounds. He knew the problem. Everyone did. The Marin Seafood Company had moved into the bay 5 years ago with boats twice the size of anything the local fishermen owned, dragging weighted nets across the sea floor and pulling up everything fish, spawn, weed, stone. The catches had dropped every year since. The village council had complained, but the company had lawyers and contracts and money, and the local fishermen had none of those things. If it was happening in the North Cove too, then the orcs were facing the same slow starvation. On the 4th day of clear weather, Padric loaded his boat with extra line and a sack of the salted cod he had put up in the spring, and sailed north. The cove was smaller than he expected, a crescent of rocky beach backed by low cliffs. 3 cottages stood above the tide line, smoke rising from their chimneys, and a single pier jutted out into the water. 2 boats were tied there, both smaller than his. He sailed in slowly, aware that he was being watched. A broad-shouldered orc man was waiting on the pier when Padric tied up. "You are the one who pulled Calla out of the Squall," the man said. It was not a question. "I am," Padric said. The orc studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I am Vorik, her uncle. She said you might come by. Follow me." He led Padric up to the largest of the cottages. Inside it smelled like smoke and salt and herbs. Calla was sitting at a table, working on a net, and she looked up in surprise when he walked in. "Padric," she said. "You came. You offered eel," he said, feeling awkward. "And I thought you might have use for this." He held up the sack of cod. Vorik took it, opened it, and grunted approvingly. "Good fish. Calla, get the eel." She set down the net and disappeared into a back room. Vorik gestured for Padric to sit. "She has been talking about you," Vorik said. "About what you did. Not many humans would have done that." "I am a fisherman," Padric said. "I know what the sea can do. Still, you did not have to." Vorik leaned back in his chair. "She told you about the trawlers." "Some. They are killing the bay," Vorik said bluntly. "We used to pull full nets every day. Now we are lucky to get half that. The breeding grounds are ruined. In another year there will be nothing left." "It is the same in the south," Padric said. "The village council has tried to stop them, but the company claims they have legal right to fish these waters. The old agreements do not mean anything to them." "They do not consider us at all," Vorik said. "To them we are squatters, poachers." Calla came back with a cloth-wrapped bundle and set it on the table. "Here, smoked eel like I promised." Padric opened it. The smell was incredible. "This is too much." "It is a fair trade," Calla said firmly. She sat down across from him. "Uncle Vorik has been trying to petition the Harbor Council for protection of the North Cove fishing grounds, but they will not even hear him. They say orcs are not citizens, so we have no standing." "That is not right," Padric said. "No, it is not, but it is the law." She looked at him steadily. "You are human. You could petition." Padric blinked. "I am just a fisherman. I have no weight with the council." "You are a citizen," Vorik said. "You have standing, and if you speak for both the human fishermen and the orc families, they would have to listen." "I do not know the law," Padric said. "I would not know what to say." "We could help with that," Calla said. "I have been reading the old charters, the agreements that were made when humans first settled here. There are protections written into them, rights for traditional fishing grounds. The company is violating those agreements, but someone has to bring it before the council officially." Padric looked at her, at the intensity in her amber eyes, and felt something in his chest tighten. She was fierce and bright and desperate, and he wanted to help her. "I would need time to think about it," he said. "To talk to the other fishermen, they would need to agree to a joint petition." "But you will consider it?" Calla asked. "Yes," Padric said. "I will consider it." She smiled, and it changed her whole face, made her look younger and less worn. "Thank you." He left an hour later, the eel wrapped carefully in his pack, and he thought about her the whole sail home. Over the next weeks, Padric found himself making the trip to the North Cove more often. At first it was to discuss the petition, to go over the old charters with Calla and her uncle, to try to build a case that might actually hold water with the Harbor Council. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that. Calla taught him orc net weaving, which was different from the human style, tighter and stronger, better for deep water. He taught her how to read the human tides, the way the currents moved around the devil's teeth, the places where the fish ran thick in summer. They talked about the sea, about boats, about the way the light looked on the water at dawn. He learned that she had wanted to be a shipwright when she was young, that she could name every boat in the bay by its silhouette, that she sang when she worked and did not realize she was doing it. She learned that he had built his own cottage, that he was terrible at cooking anything that did not come from the sea, that he had scars on his hands from a fouled line that had nearly torn his fingers off when he was 16. "You are lucky you still have them," she said one afternoon, turning his hand over to look at the white marks across his palm. They were sitting on the pier, legs dangling, the sun warm on their shoulders. "I know," he said. Her hands were small and strong, green skin dark against his. She had not let go. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. "Not usually. In winter sometimes." She traced the scar with her thumb and he stopped breathing. When she looked up at him, her expression was uncertain, hopeful, and he thought about kissing her and was terrified by how much he wanted to. "Calla," someone called from the beach, and she pulled her hand back, the moment breaking. It was Vorik waving them in. "We have a problem." The problem was the Marin Seafood Company. They had sent a representative to the North Cove with an eviction notice, claiming the land and the pier were company property, purchased from the regional land office 3 months ago. The orcs had 1 week to vacate. "This is not legal," Calla said, furious, pacing the length of her uncle's cottage. "The land was granted to the orc clans by the original settlement charter. They cannot just buy it out from under us." "They can if no one stops them," Vorik said grimly. "And who is going to stop them? The council." "They want us gone." "Not all of them," Padric said. He had been thinking about this on the sail over, turning it around in his mind. "There are council members who care about the fishing, about tradition. If we can get them to hear the petition, to see that the company is violating the old agreements, we might have a chance." "We do not have time for might," Calla snapped. "We have a week." "Then we go now," Padric said. "Today, we bring the charters, the eviction notice, everything. We make them listen." Calla stopped pacing. "You would come with us to the council?" "Of course I would." She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression, and then she nodded. "All right, let us go." The Harbor Council met in a stone building at the center of the village, a drafty room with benches and a long table where the 7 council members sat. Padric had been there once before, years ago, when his father had tried to get a loan for a new boat. It had not gone well. Councillor Brennan, who owned the largest chandlery in the village, looked up when Padric walked in with Calla and Vorik behind him. His expression soured immediately. "This is a closed session, Voss," Brennan said. "If you have business, file it through the clerk." "I have business," Padric said. "And I am filing it now. I am here to petition for protection of the traditional fishing grounds in this bay, both north and south, under the original settlement charter." "Petition denied," Brennan said. "Next." "You have to hear it first," Calla said, stepping forward. She had the charters in her arms, rolled and tied with string. "The law requires you to hear any petition from a citizen." "He is a citizen," Brennan said, pointing at Padric. "You are not. Sit down." "She is here as my witness," Padric said, "and she knows the law better than you do, apparently." "You have to hear the petition." Brennan's face went red. Another counselor, a woman named Maris who ran a weaving shop, leaned forward. "Let him speak, Brennan. It is the law." Brennan sat back, scowling. Fine, you have 5 minutes. Padric took a breath. The Marin Seafood Company is destroying the fishing grounds in this bay. Their trawling is killing the breeding grounds, and the catches are down by half. They are also violating the traditional fishing agreements by pushing into waters that were set aside for the Orc clans. I am asking the Council to enforce the protections in the original settlement charter and to restrict the company's access to these waters. The company has legal contracts, Brennan said. They own the fishing rights to this bay. No, they do not, Calla said, unrolling one of the charters. The settlement charter grants traditional fishing rights to both human and orc communities in perpetuity. Those rights cannot be bought or sold. The company is in violation. Brennan waved a hand dismissively. That charter is 100 years old. It does not apply anymore. It is the founding document of this village, Vorik said, his voice low and steady. It is the reason this place exists. If you ignore it, you are breaking the law. I do not take legal advice from orcs, Brennan said flatly. Then take it from me, said a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned. An old man was standing in the doorway, leaning on a cane. Padric recognized him after a moment. Gregor Thane, the former harbor master who had retired a decade ago. He shuffled forward and the room went quiet. That charter does apply, Brennan, Gregor said. I was here when the company first came in, and I told them they could not fish the breeding grounds. They ignored me and the council let them. Now look what has happened. This is not your concern, Gregor, Brennan said. It is everyone's concern, Gregor said. If the fish are gone, the village dies. You know that. He looked at Padric. I will support your petition. File it formally and I will sign as a witness. Maris nodded slowly. I will sign too. 2 other councillors exchanged glances, then nodded. Brennan looked around the table, his mouth tight, and Padric realized with a jolt that they had done it. They had enough votes. Fine, Brennan said. The petition will be reviewed, but do not expect miracles. The company has lawyers. So do we, Calla said. Now. They filed the petition that afternoon, and Gregor helped them draft a formal complaint to the regional magistrate. The company responded within days, sending lawyers to the next council meeting, but Maris and the other councillors held firm. The case went to the magistrate, then to a regional tribunal, and all through the summer Padric and Calla worked together, gathering testimony, mapping the fishing grounds, documenting the damage the trawlers had done. It was hard work, and it threw them together constantly. Padric found himself noticing things about her. The way she chewed her lip when she was thinking, the way she laughed when she was surprised, the way she looked at him sometimes, like he was someone worth looking at. He was falling for her. He knew it, and it scared him, but not enough to stop. One evening in late summer, they were sitting on the beach near his cottage, the sun setting red over the water. They had just come back from the tribunal, where the magistrate had ruled in their favor. The company was banned from fishing the breeding grounds and the traditional waters were officially protected. We did it, Calla said, staring out at the bay. I cannot believe we actually did it. You did it, Padric said. You found the charters, you knew the law. You made them listen, she said, turning to look at him. They would not have heard me, I needed you. Her voice was soft and there was something in her eyes that made his heart pound. He reached out, hesitated, then took her hand. She did not pull away. Calla, he said, I have to tell you something. What? He struggled for words, then gave up and just said it. I care about you, more than I should probably, more than is wise, but I do. She went very still. Padric, I know it is complicated, he said quickly. I know what people will say, but I do not care about that. I care about you. I care about you too, she said, and her voice broke a little. I have for a while now. But I did not think you, I mean, you are human and I am. "You are brave and smart and the best sailor I have ever met," Padric said. "That is what you are." She laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and tears, and then she was leaning in and he was leaning in and they were kissing, soft and tentative and perfect. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "I know, people are going to talk. Let them." She kissed him again, harder this time, and he wrapped his arms around her and held on. Complicated turned out to be an understatement. Padric's neighbors started avoiding him, and Calla got stares every time she came to the village. Someone left a dead fish on his doorstep with a note that said "Orc Lover," and Calla's remaining clan members asked her if she knew what she was doing. "Yes," she told them. "I am happy. That is what I am doing." Padric stopped going to the tavern because the looks were worse than the silence, and Calla stopped trying to sell fish at the market because the merchants would not buy from her anymore. But they had each other, and they had the sea, and that was enough. Through the autumn, they worked on a project that Calla had been dreaming about since her father died, building a new boat. Not just any boat, a two-hulled design that could handle rough water and carry a bigger load, something that combined orc craftsmanship with human sail rigging. They built it slowly, carefully, in a sheltered cove between the village and the north shore, working whenever they could spare the time. "This is going to be the best boat on the bay," Calla said one afternoon, sanding the curve of the hull. "No one will have anything like it." "As long as it floats," Padric said. She threw a piece of scrap wood at him, laughing. By midwinter the boat was nearly finished, and Padric realized that he could not imagine his life without her. It was not the dramatic, sweeping kind of love he had heard in songs. It was steadier than that, deeper. It was the way she fit against his side when they sat together, the way she knew what he was thinking before he said it, the way she made him laugh when he least expected it. He asked her to marry him on a cold, clear day in early spring, standing on the deck of the boat they had built together. There was no ring, no grand speech. He just took her hands and said, "Will you marry me?" She looked at him for a long time, her eyes bright, and then she nodded. "Yes. Yes. Yes, you fool. Of course, yes." They kissed there on the deck, the wind cold and the sea stretching out around them, and Padric felt like the luckiest man alive. The wedding was small, held on the beach with Vorik and Gregor and a handful of others who did not care about the scandal. Maris came too, and Willem, and a few of the younger fishermen who had supported the petition. The village priest refused to officiate, so Gregor did it instead, reading from a book of old maritime blessings. "By the sea and the sky, by the wind and the tide, I bind you together," Gregor said. "Go forward in love and in partnership, and may the waters always bring you home." Calla wore a dress she had sewn herself, green wool the color of summer grass, and Padric wore a clean shirt and his father's vest. They said their vows simply, promising to stand together, to work together, to sail together. And when Gregor pronounced them married, the little crowd cheered. That night they slept in the cottage that was now theirs, the fire crackling low, the sound of the sea just outside the window. Calla curled against him, her head on his chest, and Padric ran his fingers through her hair and thought about the squall, about the moment he had seen her clinging to the mast and made the decision to row out into the storm. "You ever think about that day?" Calla asked, as if reading his mind. "Yes," he said, "all the time. I think about it too. I think about how I might have died and how you did not let me. I think about everything that came after." She tilted her head to look at him. "I am glad you are stubborn. I am glad you are alive," he said. She smiled and kissed him, and they did not talk for a long time after that. Spring came in soft and green, and with it the final step of their plan. The boat was ready. They had named it the Stormborn, in honor of the squall that had brought them together. and it sat in the water like a promise, sleek and fast and strong. On the first warm day of the season, they loaded it with nets and provisions and sailed out together, just the two of them, heading for the deep water past the Devil's Teeth. The morning was clear, the wind steady from the west, and the Stormborn cut through the waves like it was made for them. Padric stood at the tiller, one hand on the line, and watched Calla move around the deck, checking the nets, adjusting the sails. She was singing some orc tune he did not know, and the sound of it made him smile. "You ready?" she called. "Ready," he said. They dropped the nets in water that had once been empty, that the trawlers had ruined, but that was slowly coming back. They hauled in fish, not a lot but enough, and when they turned for home the sun was high and the bay was spread out before them like a living thing. As they passed the Devil's Teeth, Padric looked at the rocks and thought about the girl who had clung to the mast, about the choice he had made, about all the moments that had led to this one. "What are you thinking about?" Calla asked, coming to stand beside him. "Everything," he said. "You. This, how it all happened. You rowed out in a squall for me," she said. "That is how it happened." "For your boat," he said, teasing. "For me," she said firmly. "You can admit it," he laughed. "All right for you." She leaned against him, and they sailed home together, the Stormborn moving swift and sure beneath them. When they reached the harbor, people were waiting, watching, the usual mix of curiosity and disapproval. But Padric did not care anymore. He tied up the boat, helped Calla unload the catch, and when they were done, he took her hand and they walked up the path to the cottage they shared. By summer, others had noticed the Stormborn, noticed how well it handled, how much it could carry. A few of the younger fishermen started asking Padric about the design, about whether he and Calla might build another. They did, working through the autumn, and sold it to a crew from the next village over. Then they built another, and slowly, carefully, they built a reputation. The orc families in the North Cove began to recover, their catches improving as the breeding grounds came back. Vorik started selling eel to the same merchants who had refused Calla, and this time they bought. The village changed slowly, as people realized that the orcs were not leaving, that they were part of the bay, part of the community, whether the old guard liked it or not. Padric and Calla settled into a rhythm, the kind that comes when two people know each other deeply. They fished together, built boats together, ate dinner together, and lay awake together at night talking about everything and nothing. In the second winter of their marriage, Calla told him she was pregnant, and he felt joy so sharp it hurt. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I am sure," she said, smiling. "Are you happy?" "I am terrified," he admitted. "But yes, very happy." The baby came in late spring, a boy with green skin and his mother's eyes and a squall of black hair. They named him Corin, and he was loud and demanding and perfect. Padric held him for the first time and felt something shift in his chest, some new gravity that centered him completely. "He looks like you," Calla said, exhausted and radiant in the bed. "He looks like you," Padric said. "He looks like both of us," she said. "That is the point." Corin grew fast, and by the time he was 2, Calla was pregnant again. This time it was another boy, and they named him Davir. 2 years after that came a girl, Mira, who had her father's stubborn streak and her mother's laugh. The cottage got louder, more chaotic, full of toys and laughter and the smell of fish, stew, and bread. Padric taught the children to sail as soon as they were old enough to hold a line, and Calla taught them to sing the old orc songs, the ones about the sea and the sky and the long road home. They built more boats, hired a small crew, and slowly, carefully, built a life. The prejudice did not disappear. There were still people who would not talk to them, who crossed the street when they saw Calla coming, who muttered about half-breeds and unnatural unions. But there were more who did not care, who bought their fish and their boats and treated them like anyone else. One day, years after the squall, Padric stood on the pier and watched the Stormborn sail out with a crew of young fishermen, orc and human both, heading for the deep water. Calla came to stand beside him, Mira on her hip, the boys racing around their feet. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "Just the two of us out on the water, sometimes," Padric said. "But I like this better," she smiled. "Me too." They stood there together, watching the boat disappear over the horizon, and Padric thought about the day he had rowed out into the storm, the day that had changed everything. He had not known then what he was saving, had not understood that pulling her from the water would mean pulling her into his life, into his heart, into every moment that came after. But he understood now. "Thank you," he said quietly. Calla looked at him, puzzled. "For what?" "For drifting into my life," he said. "For staying." She laughed, the sound bright and warm, and kissed him while the children ran circles around them and the sea rolled on, steady and eternal and kind. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of the sea and the seasons. Corin grew tall and serious, spending his days learning the shipwright trade from his mother. Davir was quieter, more introspective, but he had his father's knack for reading the water, for knowing when a storm was coming. Mira was fearless, the first one up the mast, the last one to admit when she was tired. The harbor council changed over time. Brennan retired, bitter and unrepentant, and Maris took his place as head counselor. She appointed Vorik as an advisor, the first orc to serve in that capacity, and together they rewrote the fishing regulations to reflect the new reality. Humans and orcs working together, sharing the bay, protecting it. The Marin Seafood Company tried to return twice, each time with lawyers and new contracts, and each time the council turned them away. The breeding grounds recovered fully, and the catches were better than they had been in decades. Other villages started to notice, started asking how it was done, and Padric and Calla found themselves hosting visitors, explaining the two-hulled boat design, the net-weaving techniques, the way they had combined orc and human knowledge to create something new. "We are famous," Calla said one evening, amused as they read a letter from a shipwright in Port Marin asking if they would consider taking on an apprentice. "We are notorious," Padric corrected. "Same thing," she said, grinning. They took on the apprentice, a young orc woman named Talia, and she moved into the small cottage they had built next to their own. She was clever and quick, and Corin developed an immediate and obvious crush on her that made Calla laugh and Padric feel old. "He is too young," Padric said. "He is 17, Calla said. "You were younger than that when you fell for me." "I was not 17, Padric said. "You were 22 and I was 20, not much difference." "There is a huge difference. He is not getting married tomorrow," Calla said patiently. "He is just smitten." "Let him be smitten." Padric grumbled but let it go. Corin was a good boy, responsible and kind, and if he wanted to follow Talia around like a lost puppy, that was his business. The village continued to change. More orc families moved to the North Cove, drawn by the promise of work and protected fishing grounds. Some humans objected, but most did not, and the objectors found themselves increasingly ignored. The market started carrying orc goods, smoked eel, woven baskets, carved bone tools, and the tavern served orc ale alongside the human brew. It was not perfect. There were still fights, still arguments, still people on both sides who could not let go of old hatreds. But it was better, and that was enough. One autumn, when Padric was 45 and Calla was 43, they took the Stormborn out alone for the first time in years. The children were old enough to manage on their own. Corin was running the boatyard with Talia. Davir was captaining his own fishing crew, and Mira was apprenticed to a sailmaker in the next village over. The cottage felt too quiet without them, and Padric and Calla found themselves restless. "Let us go out," Calla said one morning, "just for a few days, like we used to." Padric agreed immediately. They packed light, loaded the Stormborn, and set sail on a clear, cold morning. They followed the coast north, past the cove where Calla had grown up, past the cliffs where Padric had watched the Squall roll in all those years ago. They anchored in a sheltered bay and spent the afternoon fishing, talking, watching the light change on the water. That night they slept on the deck under a blanket of stars. Calla curled against his side, and Padric felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "I love you," he said into the darkness. "I know," Calla said. "I love you too." "I mean it," he said. "I do not say it enough. But I love you more than anything." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her face serious in the starlight. "I know, Padric, I have always known." "Good," he said. "I just wanted to make sure." She kissed him, soft and lingering, and they lay there together, the boat rocking gently beneath them, the sea whispering against the hull. They stayed out for 3 days, sailing wherever the wind took them, and when they finally turned back toward home, Padric felt renewed, ready for whatever came next. What came next was a cold winter, a wet spring, and then a summer so hot that the bay turned glassy and still. The fishing was good, the boatyard was busy, and the village thrived. Padric taught Davier's crew a new rigging technique, and Calla designed a smaller version of the Stormborn for coastal fishing. They worked together as they always had, side by side, and Padric could not imagine it any other way. One evening in late summer, they sat on the pier and watched the sun set, their feet dangling over the water. Corin and Talia were working in the boatyard, their voices carrying across the still air. Davier's boat was tied up at the next dock, nets drying in the last of the light. Mira was expected home the next day, her apprenticeship finished. "We did well," Calla said quietly. "We did," Padric agreed. "The children are happy, the village is thriving, the fishing is good." She looked at him. "I think we can be proud of that." "I am proud," Padric said, "of all of it." "Of you most of all," she smiled. "You are getting sentimental in your old age." "I am not old," he protested. "You have gray in your beard," she pointed out. "A little, a lot." He pulled her against him, and she laughed, and they sat there together as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear. Years passed, each one adding to the story they had built together. Corin married Talia in a ceremony that rivaled Padric and Calla's own, and a year later they had a son. Davier married a human woman from the next village, and they had twins, a boy and a girl. Mira eventually married a young orc man she met at a maritime festival, and they moved back to the village to help run the boatyard. Padric became a grandfather, then a grandfather several times over, and he found that he liked it even more than he had liked being a father. The children climbed all over him, demanded stories, begged to go out on the Stormborn. He took them out one at a time, teaching them the same things he had taught their parents, and Calla rolled her eyes and told him he was spoiling them. "That is what grandfathers do," he said. "You never spoiled our children," she pointed out. "I am making up for it now." She laughed and kissed him, and life continued, full and rich and good. One spring, when Padric was 62 and Calla was 60, they took the Stormborn out again, just the two of them. It had become a tradition, this annual voyage, a way to remember who they had been before the children, before the boatyard, before everything else. They sailed to the Devil's Teeth and anchored there in the lee of the rocks where Calla's boat had broken apart so many years ago. The water was calm, the sky clear, and Padric stood at the rail and looked down at the place where he had pulled her from the sea. "You remember it?" Calla asked, coming to stand beside him. "Every detail," Padric said. I remember the wind, the rain, the way the boat was breaking apart. I remember thinking I was going to die out there. But you did not. No, neither of us did. Calla leaned her head on his shoulder. I never thanked you properly. You thanked me with smoked fish, Padric said, and then you gave me a life. I think we are even. I gave you a life. She said, laughing. You gave me one. Then we gave each other lives, Padric said. How about that? That sounds right, Calla said. They stood there for a long time, the sun warm on their backs, the sea stretching out around them. Eventually they pulled up anchor and sailed home, and when they reached the pier, their family was waiting. Children and grandchildren, Vorik and Gregor and Maris, half the village it seemed. What is all this? Padric asked, tying up the boat. We are celebrating, Corin said. 40 years since you two got married. We thought you might forget. We did not forget, Calla said, climbing onto the pier. We just did not think anyone else would remember. Everyone remembers, Maris said. You two are a legend. We are fishermen, Padric said, embarrassed. You are more than that, Gregor said. He was ancient now, barely able to walk, but his eyes were sharp. You changed this place, made it better. That is worth celebrating. There was a feast on the beach that night, tables laden with food, lanterns strung between the trees. Musicians played and people danced and the children ran wild. Padric and Calla sat together, watching it all, holding hands under the table. This is too much, Calla murmured. They love us, Padric said. Let them show it. Later, when the party had wound down and the guests had gone home, Padric and Calla walked back to their cottage, the stars bright overhead. Inside, the fire was banked, the house warm, and they went to bed the way they had 1,000 times before, curled together, talking quietly until sleep claimed them. I am glad I drifted into your life, Calla said, her voice soft in the darkness. I am glad I rode out to meet you, Padric said. She laughed, a sound like music, and they slept. The years after that were gentler, slower. Padric's hands grew stiff, and Calla's eyes were not as sharp as they had been, but they still worked together, still took the Stormborn out when the weather was fine, still built boats and taught grandchildren and lived the life they had made. One summer evening, when Padric was 70 and Calla was 68, they sat on the deck of the Stormborn and watched the sun set over the bay. The water was calm, the air warm, and the world was so beautiful it hurt. You have any regrets? Calla asked. Padric thought about it, really thought about it, and then shook his head. No, not one. Not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts, he said. The hard parts made us who we are. She smiled and took his hand. I am glad. They sat there together as the stars came out, the sea whispering around them, and Padric thought about the Squall, the girl clinging to the mast, the choice he had made. He thought about every moment that had come after, every joy and sorrow and triumph and failure. It had been a good life. A full life, and he had shared it with the person he loved most in the world. Thank you, he said again, the words he always came back to. For what? Calla asked, the same question she always asked. For everything, he said. For being here, for staying, for loving me. Always, she said. And that was enough. They sailed home as the moon rose, the Stormborn moving swift and sure beneath them, and when they reached the pier, their family was there to help tie up, to welcome them home, to be part of the story that Padric and Calla had written together. It was a story about love and courage, about the choice to row out into the storm, about the way two people from different worlds could build something new together. It was a story about the sea, about boats, about fishing and family, and the slow, steady work of building a life. But most of all, it was a story about them. Padric and Calla, the man who rowed out in the Squall and the orc girl whose boat was lost, who had drifted into each other's lives and decided to stay. And they lived, happily and fully, For all the years they were given, building boats and raising children and watching the sun rise over the bay they had fought to protect. They grew old together, their hands entwined, their hearts steady, their love as deep and constant as the sea itself. In the end, that was all that mattered. They had rowed out to meet each other, and they had never let go.